Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for joining me. So today I'm going to be sharing what it was like to grow up in Duluth, Minnesota. Now, just to kind of start off, when you think of adventurous places to live, I guess the Midwest isn't something that comes to mind. It's generally kind of flat, and there's sort of a pervasive sedentary culture that's in everybody's mindset. But Duluth, maybe you could compare it to like the Boulder, Colorado of the Midwest or something. There's a lot to do, lots of mountain biking and skiing and rock climbing, ice climbing, all kinds of stuff. The topography there is kind of hilly and craggy, and so I wound up having a great time. When I was a little kid, I didn't really know anything about outdoor adventure other than the little creek that I was talking about where I grew up, and I got into a little bit of trouble on those cliffs and waterfalls, but nothing too crazy. For the most part, I played soccer and basketball and did the ball sports like anybody else. Ice skated, cross-country skied. But when I was 15, my buddy Mikko introduced me to the Explorer Scouts, and that kind of changed my world. So for the first time, I was introduced to this idea of how to set up ropes on these cliffs that for me had been previously inaccessible. I had seen them, but I didn't know how to get up there safely. So first time that I went climbing with the Scouts was at this little bluff in West Duluth, maybe only 50 feet tall. It was called Ely's Peak. But it wasn't terribly adventurous, but it was really interesting seeing the rope setups, I remember, and being able to experience what that felt like to rappel, slide down the rope, and then have somebody hold the other rope for you as you're climbing up. That's called belaying. And I really took to it right away. But when we went up the North Shore of Lake Superior and I started climbing at Palisade Head and Shovel Point with these guys, that's when I really started to fall in love with climbing, because this was true adventure in my mind, and it felt very committing too to lower over these places and to know that you had to climb out. There was no other way. Like if you're dangling over Lake Superior, there's no other option other than to climb out. And this feeling of commitment, the only other place that I've experienced something like this is out here in Colorado. It's this place called the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and it's another spot where you lower in, and you have to climb out, because if you don't, it's you're going to end up in some kind of epic. So obviously the scale is a lot different out here than it was in Minnesota, but in my childlike memory, it felt just as committing. But so those were wild times. I remember my favorite climb was this route called Superior Crack. And it was this overhanging 5/8 off-width. An off-width crack it's the crack size between 4 and 10 inches wide, so you can't quite get your whole body into it. So it makes it extremely difficult to climb up. But I remember these being my first climbs, learning how to climb. We're on these off-width climbs. And I remember getting all bloody and scraped up and just totally epicking on these cracks trying to get to the top of them. So these routes on the North Shore of Lake Superior were really high adventure, excellent opportunities to learn about adventure and controlling fear and how to climb. And we took these skills up to the Boundary Waters like I was talking about. We found new cliffs to climb up there. I remember this one particularly memorable route on Lake Quetico with the Scouts. We set up, Ted had set up this overhanging off-width, another overhanging off-width, and I remember struggling on this thing for probably an hour and a half, and by the time I finally got to the top, I mean, I was just so scraped up and like crying and just filled with emotion. And but I remember sitting on the top of that pinnacle looking out across the vast Minnesota wilderness with the sun setting over the lakes, and it's just gorgeous, and thinking like, I'm gonna be doing more of this for sure. So and I did. So I continued on with the Scouts for a couple of seasons, and started buying all my own gear, taking all my buddies out. We went all over the Boundary Waters up into Quetico, and one of my favorite outings that I did with my buddies. So senior year, we planned a trip up to the Boundary Waters. And there was a couple interesting stories that happened up there. One was we were paddling up to Lake Quetico and trying to get to our favorite campsite. It was this one that had all this cliff jumping and really beautiful campsite on the north shore of the lake. And we paddled in the night before. It was occupied, so we were going to have to wait in line for it. So we stayed the night on the south shore waiting for it to open up. And next morning it was open, paddled over, started doing our cliff jumping, fishing, doing our thing. Well, a couple hours into our morning, a plane started flying over, and we thought that was really bizarre. If you've ever been to the Boundary Waters, you'll know that you never hear motorized vehicles or see anything like that. So one of us had the bright idea to start mooning this plane as he was doing these low passes over our campsite. Maybe we could discourage him to get out of there. And after several passes, maybe he was there maybe 30 minutes, he finally got out of there, and we went back to doing our thing. Well, a couple hours later, a ranger paddles up and starts questioning us and asks us if we had been camped across the lake the night before. And we fessed up. We're like, yeah, we were camped over there waiting for this campsite to open up. And he says, well, apparently there was a forest fire over there, and thankfully we were able to put it out this morning. And he just kind of left it at that. And we started looking at each other like, oh crap, like apparently this plane had been putting out our forest fire and we had just been mooning him, so we felt like idiots. But I don't really remember exactly what he said, but he heavily reprimanded us, and somehow we didn't get a ticket, we didn't go to jail, and I'm not really sure how nothing happened to us. We had just started a forest fire and then mooned the rescue plane, or the plane that put out our fire. But he heavily reprimanded us and went on his way. But I just remember like how pissed off Mikko was with me when he was like, I can't believe you had the idea to start mooning that plane. But also on that trip, my buddy Petter and I, we were trying to set up some climbing on that trip in a few different spots. And because of the way that we understood Minnesota top rope setups, where you do anything you can do to find the top of a climb and then belay from the top, we were trying to get to the top of this 50-foot cliff, and there was no way to get up there other than free soloing or climbing ropeless on the left side of it. So we got out of the canoe, start scrambling up this cliff, and I got about 50 feet up and pulled on this tree root for a handhold, and it broke off, and so I'm just hanging on with my left hand. Well, under the tree root there's a hornet's nest, and so all these hornets start flying like down my shirt, down my shorts, stinging me everywhere, and I'm just hanging on because I can't fall, I can't let go, I can't fall. And Petter's down below me, and I yell down like, Petter, we gotta go down, the hornets. I don't remember what I said, but it was a dire situation for sure. So we started frantically down soloing, and I finally got to the bottom of the cliff and I could jump in the lake, and I felt lucky to survive that. Well, I remember one time Petter and I, we were on a different trip, and we got ourselves way up into Canada, several days of paddling in there, and it had been raining on us for virtually the whole time. Like everything we had was soaked, and this was in like mid to late September or something like that, so it was really cold. The water was cold, the air was cold, and everything we had was wet, and it just wouldn't stop raining. And I remember both of us getting really hypothermic, like we'd paddle our butts off during the day and sort of warm up, but everything's wet, so it was a pretty bad situation. And I remember if I hadn't known how to start a fire with birch bark, like we would have been in a really bad place. And thankfully, we were able to scrounge some birch bark, start a fire under a tarp, and get things relatively dried out. So I think that's about all the stories I'll share for today. Next time I'll be talking I'll be sharing a few more stories from Duluth. I've got to talk about our spelunking adventures, and talk about building climbing, and a few other stories to tell from Duluth before we move on. So I'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks.